Saudi Arabia's crown prince really hack the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos? According to this report, filed by Bezos' security experts, MBS's phone was probably used in the cyber attack. But the Saudis say it's an absurd accusation. Now, if you think, who cares? Well, think again. If the owner of Amazon's WhatsApp can be compromised, what hope do you have? We'll hear from one of the world's top hackers. We'll also look at what this has to do with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, why the UN's getting involved, and the salacious story of Jeff Bezos' affair. But first, this reminder of how we got here.
Spyware.
Hack.
Malware.
Hack.
Phone was hacked.
Jeff Bezos' affair.
Hack. This is quite a story.
Tonight, we are learning shocking new details about an alleged Saudi plot aimed at silencing Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and the owner of the Washington Post.
A year ago, Bezos' marriage fell apart after someone hacked his phone and revealed that he was having an affair. And now, there's a shocking revelation about who the hacker might be.
Bezos and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia swapped phone numbers during a meeting in Los Angeles.
Bezos apparently received a malware-infected video file from a WhatsApp account reportedly belonging to Mohammed Bin Salman.
Shortly after Jeff Bezos received this video, massive amounts of data started leaving his phone.
The flow of information out of the Washington Post owner's phone jumped by 29,000%.
Questions about who has access to the tech executive's phone were first raised last year after the National Enquirer leaked photos and intimate text messages between the then married Bezos and former TV anchor Lawrence Sanchez, with whom he was having an affair.
The revelations ended with him paying his former wife, Mackenzie, $35 billion in a divorce settlement.
The allegations raised serious questions about what the kingdom wanted with Bezos' information and how it used it.
Possibly, the experts say, to try and influence articles in the Washington Post.
The Saudis were unhappy with the Washington Post coverage of the kingdom and their columnist Jamal Khashoggi, a critic of the regime.
Jamal Khashoggi was killed at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul 5 months after the alleged hack.
United Nations investigators are convinced this phone attack is linked to his death.
The allegations that we have released today are one more element demonstrating the centrality of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
The idea that the Crown Prince would hack Jeff Bezos' phone is absolutely silly.
The thing that made Bezos particularly vulnerable is the same thing that makes you or I vulnerable. And that is not technical, it's trust.
So you do have to be careful with whom you share your phone number. Let's bring in our guest now. And up there on the top left is Josh Klein, a top professional hacker who's worked with the likes of Microsoft. He joins us from New York. Professor Dave Desroches is a former US Defense Department advisor who visits Saudi Arabia frequently. And finally, Ghanem Al-Masir. He's a popular Saudi YouTuber who lives in London. He claims his phone was also hacked by the Saudi government around the same time as Jeff Bezos. Let's go to Josh first. Now, Josh, the private security firm hired by Bezos, let's have a look at its official report here, assesses with medium to high confidence that Bezos' iPhone X was compromised via a WhatsApp video attachment that was sent from an account utilized by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman. Josh, what do you make of the report? Do you come to the same conclusions?
Well, most malware of that type is going to self-destruct after it's deployed, so it's impossible to really know. But based on all the evidence that they gathered, which is to say that the phone started spitting out data at an extremely high rate just after the penetration happened, seems likely that something went wrong.
Professor Desroches, you said you've seen many of these sorts of reports, and you don't rate this one. Why?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, the first question is you look at motive and opportunity. What the report really does is It has conclusions, it has some technical information, but the bulk of the report, it describes the techniques that the investigators went through. So it could be a legit report, but really all we know is that there was a mass exfiltration of data from the Bezos' cell phone. And, even the report, which was commissioned by Bezos, only gives at worst a medium confidence. So there may be something
medium
going
to
on.
high, to be fair, medium to high. Josh, the whole thing
I said at worst.
Well, Ghanem, let's come to you for a moment. You say your phone was hacked around the same time. What made you suspicious?
My phone was like draining battery quickly and not updating at all. And then a friend asked me to check them up. And as we checked them up, that was in 2018, we discovered that they was hacked by a software called Pegasus. And after examination, they determined it has came from Saudi Arabian controlled server. So we went through a legal case since then, and we've been granted permission from the High Court to serve to the Saudi government because there is sufficient evidence and there is an arguable case.
Fair enough. Let's go back to that report now by Bezos' cybersecurity experts. They say the phone was compromised, possibly via tools procured by Saud Al-qahtani, a close friend and advisor of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman, MBS. Of course, the Saudis dispute this claim.
Well, I think absurd is exactly the right word. The idea that the Crown Prince would hack Jeff Bezos' phone is absolutely silly. And my understanding of the UN report, it's not actually a report, it's a statement based on a report by a private company that has not been vetted by any independent agency and that has, in its own conclusions, no hard evidence to substantiate the claims it's making.
Professor DeRoche, you worked in the US Department of Defense in the Clinton White House. Must have been an interesting time for you. And you still work in Saudi Arabia, training their armed forces in a certain capacity. You accept the Saudi account then?
Well, what I accept is that first reports in war are always wrong, that Bezos has motive to try to implicate the Saudis, that the Saudis have motive to try to discredit Bezos, but there's a lot of fog around here. Lawrence Sanchez's brother has been identified as the source of a lot of these leaks at question in the American media, at least. And attribution, even if you accept that something happened, attribution is really, really hard here. So what I'm saying is that a lot of the reports in the media are really overstated as to culpability. And I think that, the hacker, your hacker guest is right that you can't really attribute what's going on here. It does look like there was suspicious activity. Let me put another thing here. If people are capable of, exfiltrating data for a cell phone, wouldn't they also be capable of exfiltrating spoofing where a message came from? I mean, there's just, we don't know a lot here, but we do know that there's bad blood here, and there's a lot of reasons for people to try to impute motives.
We're going to come on to that in just a second. Josh, I want to come to you for a moment. The report says Al-qahtani has long worked with a company called Hacking Team, developers of programs used by many nation states to spy on dissidents. And Al-qahtani eventually purchased 20% ownership in Hacking Team. What do you know about Hacking Team?
Hacking Team, it's a Milan-based security company. They've got a product called Galileo, which is used for exfiltrating data, but that's not unique. There are these sorts of products and services all over the world, and in fact, most of them you don't know about because they're only for private sale.
Ghanem, tell us more about Saud Al-qahtani.
Saud Al-qahtani is very close to his advisor to Crown Prince, and he was previously involved in hacking, and he was buying softwares and advising the government on how to spy in dissidents and things like that. He organized Saudi cyber organization, and he's running that. So he is involved he's fully involved in spying and dissident. I mean, he was acquitted from the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. I believe he was involved in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. He was the coordinator between MBS and the team who carried out this heinous crime. So he was acquitted. So if he's coming back to do his dirty job with the backing from MBS, then of course we should fear him, because nothing would stop him then.
Now, there is a lot going on with this story, a lot of dates and characters, but before we go any further, a quick look at how they all fit together. The two main players, Bezos and MBS, you are already familiar with. This was snapped back in 2016 in Riyadh, when the two still hoped to profit from their relationship. But the following year, the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi started writing articles for Bezos' paper, The Washington Post. The articles were critical of MBS, covering press freedoms and the war in Yemen, amongst other things. A few months later, Mohammed Bin Salman allegedly hacked Bezos' phone, and it's suggested this was part of a plan to eventually put pressure on Bezos to stop the articles. That was May. By October, the Saudis made sure the articles stopped by brutally murdering Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. When the Washington Post began investigating the murder of their journalist, Saudi Arabia unleashed its cyber army, Twitter bots which attacked Bezos and his business interests. The first clue that MBS may have hacked Bezos' phone was when a message from MBS's WhatsApp account appeared to show knowledge of Bezos' rift with his wife, which had yet to be announced. Then came the January 2019 Enquirer expose about Bezos' affair with Lauren Sanchez, complete with personal texts and pictures. The National Enquirer insisted they'd got their information from Lauren's estranged brother, Michael Sanchez. But when Bezos got his head of security, Gavin de Becker, to investigate the leak of information, the National Enquirer appeared to be rattled. In February, the Enquirer's owner, AMI, threatened to publish even more compromising material on Bezos unless he dropped the investigation. Bezos called their bluff, publishing their email exchange and observing the close links that the company and its CEO, David Pecker, had with the Saudi Crown Prince via President Trump. Then last week, the UN Special Rapporteur looking at the murder of Jamal Khashoggi gave the hacking allegations against MBS even more weight, demanding a formal US investigation. Back up to Professor Desroches now. Professor, the speculation then is that the Saudis wanted Khashoggi to stop writing these articles, and they thought if they could get dirt on Bezos, they could apply some pressure in due course to have them stop that. You don't buy that as an explanation, do you?
Well, I do buy that the Saudis were not happy with Jamal's writing. Look, Jamal was a well-known figure here in Washington, liked and respected. He was a firmament of the think tank community. I considered him an acquaintance, not a friend, but somebody I'd certainly like to be friends with. That was a serious misstep for Saudi Arabia. And it really, the damage has not stopped. But the question is, how does that, a lot of the links to the hacking, things like that, those have yet to be proven. And, you're
absolutely right. Professor Desroches, just explain how important the Washington Post is in shaping opinion, not just in America, but in particular in the capital itself.
Oh, yeah. No, look, the Washington Post is the paper of record, here in the political circles. So that's the first thing that most people read every day. It sets the tone of the debate. It sets the agenda for public discussion. It's slightly less influential than it was 15 years ago because there's a proliferation of outside media and accusations of bias, et cetera. But it still is, as I said, probably the most important political newspaper in America, one of the two most important newspapers in America. And, to conduct, to murder one of their columnists, that was an amazing mistake, error, crime. And it's damaged the cause of Saudi Arabia in the United States, for generations. I mean, this is something that's going to be very, very difficult to overcome.
Ghanem, let me come to you for a moment. When UN human rights experts demanded that the United States open up an investigation into the Jeff Bezos hacking, how did that make you feel?
That makes me feel happy, because there is a pressure in America and in the international community to investigate this, because the explanation coming out from Saudi, it's absurd. That's how I will call it, because we have a slightly longer memory than the Saudis, because when they killed Jamal Khashoggi, the Crown Prince came publicly and denied that, while he knew Jamal Khashoggi was dead. So we shouldn't take any statement coming out of Saudi. And if there is investigation coming to the hacking of Jeff Bezos, then I'm 100% sure we will come to the conclusion. And we have in Arabic saying, there is no smoke without a fire. I have been hacked during that period of time, Jeff Bezos, and we have found out that we have been hacked. How many people that who already been hacked and they may not know they have been hacked.
That's a good point, and we're going to come on to that a little later. Josh, I want to ask you a question. The UN Special Rapporteur says the hack is in a different league. Is it?
Well, it's exploiting, what you would call a zero-day or an unknown attack vector, and we still don't know exactly how it worked, if it actually happened. All we know is what you've read in the report, right? That MBS sent an unusually large file to Bezos, and shortly after, Bezos' phone started spitting a lot of stuff out, and that there were a few text messages that seemed to implicate knowledge on the part of MBS that he shouldn't have had otherwise. Where it came from, they don't know. How it happened, they don't know. The only thing that makes it extraordinary is that it's likely using some very expensive malware.
Professor DeRoche, quick question for you about this whole battle between the Enquirer and Bezos, and even Donald Trump is there on the periphery. Yeah. Can you just explain what that's about?
Oh, Lord. Well, basically, the Enquirer is a muckraking magazine in the United States, newspaper. It's not in the same league as the Washington Post. Usually it publishes photographs of drunken movie stars. So when they published the news that Bezos was having an affair, people were looking out and saying, okay, where did this come from? Why is this happening? The owner of the Enquirer is a close political ally of President Trump. Trump has been critical of the Washington Post, of course, because the Washington Post is very critical of President Trump. The Saudi angle, of course, we've spoken of Jamal Khashoggi, and of course, I cannot imagine what it must be like heading a large organization, one of whose stars is murdered, trying to keep morale in that organization. So everybody kind of has a motive to attack everybody else here. But none of that proves everything. Can I go back to the issue of the threats, supposed threats?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you have the weakest part of the report is where it deals with what were threats. Honestly, it strikes me in reading the report that some of these are rather innocuous. Do you have the photograph from page 5?
We do, yeah, we're showing it now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the report and the newspaper articles describing the report say that the picture of the woman on the left is supposed to intimidate Bezos into saying, I know that you're having an affair with the woman on the right. And that's how it was reported almost uncritically in the New York Times and the Post. Honestly, the only thing I see these women having in common is that they're brunette and good looking. So I think these are early days and we should perhaps reserve judgment until...
I think a lot of people, well, certainly in the newsroom, our newsroom, have picked up on the same point. There is another question here, which is that the Bezos' cybersecurity team believe that the Saudis had the same information that the Enquirer used, supposedly, from Sanchez's estranged brother, and they're sort of asking you to draw your own conclusions. But no one's actually making that allegation outright, are they, that the Saudis supplied the pictures and information to the Enquirer in order to publish the expose against Bezos?
Well, I'm sorry to let you down. I haven't delved as deeply into the text of the various articles to do that, but it's pretty clear that the public narrative being spun, again, by the world's richest man who owns one of the two most influential newspapers in America, it makes it pretty easy. I think a casual reader who doesn't dive in, who doesn't read it draws the dots that connects it straight from his phone to his marital problems, to Saudi Arabia, to the Crown Prince. And in an examination of at least the technical report, I don't think warrants that conclusion.
Fair enough. Now, we don't know for sure who hacked Jeff Bezos' phone, but what is clear is that he and his team believe it was hacked via WhatsApp. Let's look at how the cybersecurity guys worked that out.
The billionaire and the prince share a posh dinner in Los Angeles, April the 4th, 2018. They exchange numbers, and Bezos quickly sends his first message. The following day, MBS replies, and so begins their WhatsApp relationship. 10 months later, somebody tips off Bezos' top security advisor that his boss's phone may be subject to an advanced persistent threat, or a prolonged and targeted cyber attack aimed at stealing data. A week later, Bezos hires a top cybersecurity forensic team, FTI Consulting. They took Bezos' iPhone into lockdown in a highly secured lab for 2 days. Technicians had to pass through metal detectors, work around the clock, and allow no electronic devices in or out. In the end, investigators were not able to find any specific malware. However, one message in particular did catch their attention. A seemingly innocuous video from MBS' phone sent just 1 month after the two exchanged numbers. Now, it's unclear whether Bezos even clicked on the video, which appeared to be a promotional film about telecoms. But within hours of receiving this message, data began flying out of Bezos' phone at an unprecedented rate, around 300 times more than normal. And it raises the question, if the richest man in the world can be targeted so easily, where does that leave the rest of us?
Well, exactly. Let's go back up to Josh. Josh?
Well, again, because the malware would be designed to self-destruct, you're not going to find it on there. And because WhatsApp is designed with end-to-end encryption, you're not going to know what the delivery mechanism actually had in it. So you can't say factually what was delivered or what it did. But it's pretty clear that when your traffic increases by 30,000%, something's off, right? And it continued to do that up until the time that FTI went and put it in lockdown.
But the problem is you'd never know if, well, maybe you can. Maybe there are signs that you've been hacked. What can you check for?
Well, again, it depends on what's being done. One of the things that's tricky about what happened to Bezos is that the traffic out of his phone increased substantially, but it increased most substantially in spikes. So if you look at the history of the data egress from his phone over time, it's generally higher. And then there are massive strikes where huge amounts of data were pulled out. So that could have been a big dump of all the photos, or it could have been all of his Skype logs, or all of his text messages. It's hard to say.
There's been some speculation amongst my colleagues. They say, well, wouldn't his battery have run down, or wouldn't his phone bill have shot up? Anything like that?
Well, I'm suspicious that Bezos has a pretty good data plan, right?
I suspect he has.
Right? And if you time when you do the downloads, like let's say you only download all the data late at night when he's got the phone plugged in and he's not noticing that it's running hot, then, who's to know?
Do you have to be a billionaire to afford this sort of nasty technology, or can ordinary people, and are ordinary people doing this?
So this is one of the problems with IT security today is companies like Apple, for example, run a bug bounty program where if you find a vulnerability like this, you can submit it, and if it's legitimate, you can make up to $200,000. Wow. The problem is $200,000 is pocket change compared to what you can make selling it to nation states. So most high-end malware authors out there are dealing through brokers that are under contract that stops paying out if the exploit is fixed. Pegasus, the one that has been asserted is responsible for this particular attack, although again, there's no evidence, seems to have been active since 2013. So if you were a large company or you had deep pockets, you could go and buy this and use it, and could have been doing so for years.
Josh, before we started recording, you mentioned it is possible to reduce your attack surface. What's that?
Attack surface is just a term that refers to the the breadth of the vulnerability that you have. So if you're on 6 different social software platforms and you log in and off of different computers throughout the day, and you use one password for all of your accounts, then you've got a pretty good attack surface. If you live in the woods and you don't have electricity, you've got a much better one.
A last sort of consumer question for you, Josh. What would you advise people to do to protect themselves, and should they be switching to another messaging service?
Well, if you're concerned about privacy, there are other platforms like Signal. Some people say that that's more secure. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit stuff you can do, like changing your passwords, using centralized password aggregators. I mean, go out there and search for how to secure your phone and follow the steps. It'll be inconvenient, but if you're worried about large-scale governments coming after you, it might be a good first step.
Would it help to keep your number guarded and only to give it to people you 100% trust?
Sure, it would be very helpful, and it would also mean that you would have significantly less utility from the phone. That's part of the problem with these platforms, right? Their value is concomitant with the number of people you interact with.
Well, Josh Klein, you have the final word there. Thank you. Thank you also to David DeRoche and Ghanem Al-Masira. Appreciate your contributions to the Nexus, and thank you also for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. But for now, goodbye, and see you next week.